Like there's a lot of focus of on the farm. There's not a lot of focus of the entire water cycle, where that water is originating and where it's going. I think if farmers had a better idea of how their soil handled water and where it was stored, how transitioning it from the ground into rivers and streams and bayous is not necessarily natural, just kind of having a better idea of how water moves and where it goes, I think would really help the conversations that I'm having.
Hi, I'm Audrey Kolde, Agriculture Specialist for the National Center for Appropriate Technologies, ATRA. Today, we're diving into water, too much and too little, floods and droughts. Our guest today is an associate professor, statewide irrigation specialist, and irrigation engineer with LSU Ag Center. Her main focus is the development and efficient operations of irrigation systems. Please welcome Dr. Stacia Congers. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So what led you to this world of irrigation efficiency and engineering?
Yeah, so I actually started my education as a civil engineer, and I had this interest in environmental engineering as well as water resources engineering. And when I was looking at grad school, things just kind of lined up to explore this area of water and engineering, where we looked at irrigation systems and applications. And so when I went to grad school, I kind of shifted into this agricultural engineering area where we focus on land and water engineering systems for farms and for landscapes and basically anything related to the environment. And so I really fell in love with my work. And so my first projects I worked on were landscape irrigation. I was working with homeowners on how they irrigated and how we could help them improve that irrigation. And then when I moved to Louisiana about 10 years ago, I kind of switched to the agricultural irrigation side. I still do a little horticulture, but for the most part, my job is agricultural engineering. So I try to help farmers improve their irrigation and give them more tools and options to do better.
Yeah, and I think it's a very common kind of situation where in farming we get kind of siloed into our own world where we're like, all right, I'm horticulture, I'm agronomic crops, I'm animal, we get siloed. And I think there's a lot of information sharing that is the bridges are still being built in between homeowners and the world of landscape architecture and things like that and farming. Yeah. And so that's cool that you get to help build part of that bridge.
Yeah, I'm actually in a very unique situation because that bridge is happening, I think, all over the US, especially after the pandemic. A lot of people were getting into much larger gardening operations, looking at homesteading. And so homesteading has been something that's been pretty important to us here where I work. We actually do a homesteaders conference and educate people on all the different aspects of homesteading. And so irrigation has become an important part of that because, it's no longer just irrigating some flowers and some grass in your yard. It's now keeping your investment alive. And it's 2 to 15 acres in size. And, that homesteading, it really is merging farmers with that horticulture aspect. And so I get to really work with people who have all different sizes of systems and applications and different water sources and just all these different things that I love putting the puzzle together.
From what I understand with that engineering, that is a big piece of engineering is problem solving and finding ways to, because what kind of knowledge did you learn along the way in order to help be able to develop these irrigation systems?
I learned so many different things. Like there's the engineering aspects with, you learn the water cycle and you learn, how water moves through a pipe, the different things that go into how water moves, like elevation, pressure, velocity, all these different things. But then you also have to kind of learn the human aspect because irrigation systems are managed by humans. And so not everything is automated and not everything can be automated. You have that human component to how they utilize that system and how they want to utilize that system. So that brings in some social sciences and behavior and barriers to adoption of different practices. And I've had to expand my knowledge to different types of crops because water requirements are different soil types. Louisiana has what feels like a billion different soil types. And so to be able to irrigate correctly, there's all these other aspects of the cropping system that you have to understand, at least minimally, to be able to give the right information. And so that's been something I've had to really work on and really make sure I'm seeing the whole picture when I give a solution to somebody.
There's always so many inputs in every situation. Even the water usually has so many micronutrients and micro minerals in it.
Oh, yeah. Water quality is like this whole other aspect. And I have to say, I've always focused on the system and kind of left water quality to the chemistry people. And I'm very happy to report that the Ag Center has added some water quality faculty to really supplement the work that I do. And they're doing a really great job. So that it is very important to irrigation, knowing your water quality and how to handle that. It's just not something I've focused on in my career.
And over these past 10 years of getting to talk with farmers, since I know part of your time is extension services and meeting with farmers as well as research and teaching, what is happening in Louisiana with these farmers? What issues are they facing over the last 10 years? Yeah.
Yeah, so water availability is a huge issue, and aquifer health. Basically, the aquifer is the groundwater where we store water in the ground. And so I think the number is maybe 80 to 90% of our farmers use groundwater for irrigation. And in some parts of the state, that's the primary use of the aquifer. We still gravity feed irrigation down our fields, which means we're pumping very high volumes that kind of cause that aquifer to decline very quickly, even if it's temporary. And then hopefully it does rebound during the winter. But if we have a dry winter, sometimes it'll take a few years to rebound. Sometimes it doesn't rebound to the same level. We're kind of pumping at a rate that's not really sustainable when we focus on ag. Another component to that is we're not always the only users of the groundwater. So, we want to invite industry into Louisiana. We want to have that economic development, and water is a huge factor, and water availability is a huge factor to these companies of whether they're going to be able to operate long term and put the investment in. We have to look at not only becoming sustainable in terms of what we're using for just agriculture, but we also have to look at sustainability for all water users. Because, I know you and I still want to have drinking water if we're on groundwater. A lot of people still want to be able to do their recreational activities. People still want to go fishing and duck hunting and all these other activities. And so as we drain our aquifers, our surface water is connected to those many times. And so it starts to affect surface water, which is our only other option if you can't use groundwater is surface water. And so just kind of understanding where the water is going and how we're using it and being judicious with it, making sure we're using it when we need to is probably one of our biggest problems.
Yeah, that really having all of us understand cycling. And again, in Louisiana, we do have a lot of groundwater. Historically, we have a lot of rainfall, but I know your position over the last 5 years, like you came 5 years ahead of that massive drought, or a little more than 5 years ahead of that massive drought in 2023. I know Louisiana wasn't the only state that has suffered a drought over the past 10 years, but it felt really bad in my lifetime, like one of the worst droughts. And I could be wrong. I don't have data on that, but I know it was huge losses in economic value, saltwater intrusion that started happening because the Mississippi water levels were so low, and really affecting drinking water, even just the absorption of water when it rained. I remember that soil becoming like hydrophobic in my own farm. And
Yes.
uh, it was terrifying. You're like, I'm watering this, but it's just not absorbing because of my farming practices. And that's really whenever I started to hear about your work and what you were doing to promote this replenishment of aquifers and soil health in Louisiana. How have you seen, now that we're a couple years out from that, have you seen like the point of view of farmers really shifting from this place of drought, every now and again, to such a severe drought?
So it's actually a very interesting question because there's actually multiple things going on that are affecting it. Historically, if you look at the data, after every big drought Louisiana has, you typically see a big jump in irrigation capacity, which basically means farmers are adding more irrigation abilities on more fields because they're seeing, okay, well, I just lost all of my crops that weren't irrigated last year. I need to do whatever I can afford to add some more irrigation so that doesn't happen again. So historically, we've seen that big jump afterward. However, this time we complicated it with the pandemic and with increasing, like inflation, increasing prices of everything. Tractors and combines are way more expensive than they ever used to be. And then fertilizer prices skyrocketed. All of these economic issues showed up. To top it off, a lot of our farmers utilize cost share programs with the federal government. And so those are, the future of those are a little questionable right now. And so the economics of adding irrigation capacity isn't really there right now. And so I looked at the numbers this morning, very preliminary, but I did look at them, and I do not see an increase in acreage this time. I think until our farmers have a little bit more security in their future, because 2023 was really bad, but we also had a short drought in 2022, and then we had torrential rains that destroyed a bunch of stuff in 2021 with hurricanes and everything. So we've had multiple bad cropping years, and those issues compound. And so I just don't think we're in a great place right now, a very stable place for investing in irrigation when you're looking to just try to get your bank loan for next year. Like, that's the priority. And so I'm really interested to see what happens, in the next 5 years, the next 10 years, and see how this kind of levels out and gets back to supporting our farmers in all their different risk areas, including irrigation.
Yeah, that's a really sad picture.
Yeah.
I know in the moment, like the survivalist mentality in that drought, am I remember correctly that there was no need for a permit on wells?
Yeah, they did a temporary lift of the permit application process because it's a 60-day, I think it's 60-day wait between when you submit the permit and when you can actually drill the well. And so they basically eliminated that 60-day wait. So I think you still were supposed to tell them that you were going to put in a well, but it could be after the fact. And it was basically just get it done.
Yeah, just save the crop.
Yeah. 2023 was the reason it was so bad. It wasn't just the length of the drought, because we've had longer droughts, but the drought came with extremely high temperatures, which was actually probably worse than just the drought itself. The high temperatures mean that you're evapotranspiring much quicker, much higher, which means you're losing water at a quicker rate. And the crops don't do super well over like 93 degrees Fahrenheit or so. And so we had, I think in the area I live, we had like 45 days above 100 degrees. Our crops got hit from both drought and extreme temperatures that year, which is what made it so bad because none of us knew it was coming. We were kind of predicted through the weather service that rain was coming. We were going to have a bad hurricane season, like it's coming. I had farmers that have irrigation capacity, but they didn't use it because they were waiting for those rains to happen and they just never came. So it came without warning and it was doubly bad.
Yeah, I remember that was the first time I ever realized how beneficial sometimes hurricanes can be to that system. Obviously, horrible wind damage, everything else, but like to break the heat wave, you kind of needed influx of rain,
Right.
which never came. And so, like with these difficulties and systems and everything, I know you were able to work to develop a tool to help farmers know a lot more about their irrigation needs. The dirt tool, what did that look like developing and utilizing?
Yeah, we actually got a grant off the 2022 drought to produce that tool. And so basically, it's an irrigation scheduling web tool. So any farmer who grows corn, cotton, soybean, grain, sorghum, and potentially sugarcane can log into the Ag Center's website, lsuagcenter.com/dirt, and they can basically set up a field. It's very simple. That was our goal. We talked with producers. I actually created an advisory group to help me create the tool because I wanted it to be something a farmer would use. And so I figured what better way than to have the farmers tell me what they want in it. And so one of the things they really wanted was simple, and they wanted it to look clean and not be like congested and hard to find different options and whatnot. And so we went as simple as possible. So they put in like 6 or 7 different things. Like they use a map to pick where their field is. That pulls in all their weather data and like all this other stuff. And then they tell us what crop they're growing the day they planted, what soil type they have. And then they have some options where they can change what it inputs because we'll pull in information from those answers automatically. They can do some editing if they want. If they don't feel the need, they move to the next step. And it's basically just 4 different ways to see their irrigation happening. And so it's very comparable to like what a soil moisture sensor would give you. There's actually one graph farmers requested that it looked like what a soil moisture sensor company would show you because that's what they're used to seeing. You can also see an instantaneous view where just what is today, where we stand right now. You can see that over the entire crop season. And then there's also a table where you can export the information. And that was meant for you to be able to have it because as far as we're concerned, it's your farm, it's your irrigation, it's your records. You can own it. You can also use that spreadsheet for your irrigation cost share payments. So as a record. So it would count as basically turning in your irrigation records as long as you kept it up to date. So the one thing the farmer has to do throughout the crop season, other than just kind of look to see where they're at in terms of soil moisture, is they have to input when they apply irrigation, because there's no way for us to know that. The farmers will basically have a full record of all of their evapotranspiration, all of their rainfall, and then all of their irrigation events. And that's what NRCS is looking for. That's basically all it is it's just helping you pick when to irrigate.
You've said the word a couple of times. Will you explain a little more about what evapotransport is, just so we know, because it sounds like it's an important piece of the puzzle in irrigation.
Yeah, and thanks for asking that, because I probably should have explained it before. So evapotranspiration is the combination of evaporation, which happens from the soil surface just by the sun hitting it. Water evaporates from the surface of the soil. Plants transpire water, which basically means they take up water from the roots. So only the water in the root zone in the soil is accessible by the plant. If the water's sitting next to it, the plant can't access it because it has to go in through the root. The plant will take up the water in the roots, and then it'll move up through the plant, and then it will transpire what it doesn't need through its leaves. When we're calculating irrigation to someone like me, it doesn't matter whether it was evaporated or transpired. It's no longer available to the plant. So we combine it into one term called evapotranspiration, and we can calculate that number from weather stations and then do some minor adjustments to get it specific to the crop. So it just gives us basically a target of the water loss from the soil so that we know how much to replace. And so dirt operates off of evapotranspiration estimates.
It's not the same, but I imagine similarly to like your nutrient additions, whenever you're thinking of that, you're thinking of volatilization of nitrogen every year and things like that. So you're similarly where you're like, even though I applied, whatever gallons of water, I still, it's not 100% ability to uptake or go into an aquifer. The air needs water too, especially in Louisiana where we like it humid.
So our humidity actually limits our evapotranspiration because only so much water can be held in the air. And so we will only transpire what the air can hold. So if it is really humid, it does slow down transpiration. So it slows down basically your water loss rate. Whereas if you go out west in California, they don't have the same humidity that we have. And so it feels like their evapotranspiration is almost limitless because we're limited at like maybe a third of an inch per day, whereas they can evapotranspirate maybe like up to an inch per day of water. So we're really lucky to actually have that limitation because our crops still grow really well, but that means we can irrigate less often than them.
Fascinating. Oh my goodness. Thanks for explaining that.
Sure.
And to put it into reference of this location versus the world around us. So in thinking about this broader picture and climate variability between the dry and the wet, the humid and frost, what is designing irrigation systems in this uncertainty really look like? Or how do you factor that in that you're like, well, this year there's going to be a late ice or I don't know. There's lots of different factors in this. And how are you trying to create those variables in the system?
Right. Basically, you are supposed to design the system for what you think is the worst case scenario. I would say most of the time you're not going to get that because it's not economical to do so. Because if it's the worst case scenario, it's not the most often scenario. So like in 2023, when it was so bad, I think we saw the limitations of a lot of systems because they weren't designed to be in that awful of a situation where it needed that much water. And in those cases, for our farmers, the most you can get out, at least that is beneficial. It might not be everything your plant needs. You may have a little bit of hit on yield overall, but if that's just 1 year and you have 8 years before the next one, you can kind of get away with not designing to the worst case scenario. But if it's a one-time investment, like for example, we were talking about the homesteading, and if you have 5 acres and you're planning on that sustaining your family for through the next generation, you may want to think about water storage because your water availability could go away. So having on-site water storage, being able to have multiple sources to blend water together to really supplement, and making sure that, even if you are planning on expanding at some time, maybe designing the initial system to accommodate the expansion in the future, even if it never happens, you had the opportunity to do that where it's more expensive to come back and replace all that with something bigger. And so when I work with someone, if someone comes to me and says, I don't know what to do, talk me through it. Those are the types of questions that we start with. Well, what is your goal? How long are you planning on doing this? What's the likelihood that this is going to change? All these different questions go into what kind of investment you're going to make. And then we have to go through all the questions of, what is your water source? Do you know your flow rate currently? Have you seen that decline at all? Just to kind of get an idea of the situation that they're in so that we can match the equipment and the design to that. There's just so much that goes into it, and it's all site specific.
Yeah, because where I'm at in Alexandria, it's super interesting to think about that site specificity, because like where I'm at, whenever we get really low in the summer, we start having iron, a lot of mineralization in our water. But then our neighbors down the road, it's a huge nursery industry in Forest Hill, and their water is like super clean. That's one of the reasons I said that they ended up establishing in Forest Hill, was because whatever their well water sources doesn't have a lot of pH or like issues with it, with salts and everything like that. So even thinking 10 miles down the road, their water source from their wells are so unique. And it's just always so interesting to think about all the variabilities in that.
Yeah, I tried to pull the groundwater aquifers once into GIS to try to give a picture of how they are situated. And you can't, not with a 2D picture. And I'm not good enough to do the 3D visioning. And so like our aquifers are very complex and very dynamic. They could be very, very deep in one place, and they could actually touch the surface in another place. And that water would take hundreds of years to get from one end to the other. The amount of geological formations under us is just incredible. And that's what makes that happen is Forest Hill, the nursery in Forest Hill could have this great pocket of water that they're tapping into, and your groundwater well could be 50 feet shallower, and it's basically tapping either another aquifer or a different part of the aquifer that's not as clean. It may be surface water that's just infiltrating and being stored, instead of like an aquifer that's confined, which basically means it's been in the ground for tens to hundreds of thousands of years, which we do tap into sometimes, but we like to use the surface water because it replenishes as much as possible.
Moving forward, whenever you're looking with these farmers and the technologies to reduce how much water they're needed so that there's less variability and less issues with this climate change, what are your research projects that you're getting to do right now? I think I heard rumors of rice and drip irrigation.
Yes. I know a lot of farmers aren't going to use drip irrigation. Like that's just not going to be in the cards. But there are specific places for it. Like if you have a very awkwardly shaped field, if you have very limited water availability where that field is, there's just certain situations that make micro irrigation a much better option. You're never going to furrow irrigate something that doesn't have quite a bit of flow there. Whereas drip irrigation needs very little flow compared to furrow irrigation. And so, that might be a better option. And it also increases the efficiency. Plus, I do work with horticulture people, and with the cash crops, it's easier for them to invest in drip technology. And so I just really wanted to have a drip study on the research station, so that we could demonstrate growing crops with that type of system. And so I worked with Netafim and Irrigation Mart to basically design, and I'm currently installing small plot drip irrigation. And we are going to grow rice this year because a colleague of mine has a climate smart agriculture project, and he is going to grow rice by flooding it, permanent flood, and then he will alternate wet and dry it, which means he'll allow it to draw down and kind of get mucky in the soil before he refloods, which is considered a water conservation practice. And he is going to furrow irrigate rice. And so I will drip irrigate it on the same station, and then I'm going to look at the water use, and he's going to look at the greenhouse gases. We're just kind of merging our projects a little bit so that we can kind of get the full scale of what it's like to grow rice in this part of the state, which is something that our local farmers are starting to do, but not something we have historically done here. So rice is kind of new for us. And so this is going to be a very interesting project, I think, this year. And then after this year, my intention is to rotate. So we will rotate from rice to either corn or soybean next year, and then see where we go after that.
That's super exciting. It's interesting to hear about rice not being as utilized in North Louisiana. We know South Louisiana is rice country, but then we go over the border into Arkansas and like southern Arkansas. They actually produce more rice than Louisiana. We're more of a tree state. That's our number one export.
Right.
And so
but Arkansas is actually the fourth largest water user of the U.S., and it's attributed to their rice production. It uses a lot of water, and they're not even fully flooding anymore. A lot of them are furrow irrigating it, which gives them a bit more options of rotating their crops.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to grow those other crops in rice paddies. So, but it's easier to grow rice on a furrow irrigated field.
Yeah.
And we do have quite a bit of row rice. That's what we call furrow irrigated rice, is row rice. We do have quite a bit of that in North Louisiana on the northeast side. But I'm on the northwest side on the Red River, and our farmers just recently started looking at other crops. Rice is one of them. And I heard one of our farmers has put in I think they said about 1,000 acres of peanuts, which is the first time I've heard of that over here. We're kind of expanding and looking at some different options now.
That's exciting. More variety is always exciting, as long as And then do you I think you have another piece of research also happening with tile drainage?
Yeah. So a couple years ago, I was at a conference, and I met this woman from a company called ADS out of Ohio. And she was talking about how tile drainage could work in the South. I started thinking about it, and I really think that in Louisiana, we need irrigation, but we also need drainage. And in some years, we need both. Like it's not exclusive to a certain crop season. Sometimes you just have our rain comes in monsoons, basically. Like we will get a lot of rain at one time. And so our crops don't like either scenario. They want to be happily in the middle. For me, if irrigation only is too expensive and drainage is an issue, then it seems more economical to have a system that can handle both irrigation and drainage. And so there's this technique called sub-irrigation, where when there's too much moisture, the water drains into these field tiles or pipes, perforated pipes, and drains the field so that the crops are happy. And then when it starts to turn dry, basically you add a pump, and you pump at a very slow rate water back into those tile, back into the pipe. And you just slowly fill up the pipe, and you don't create a lot of pressure, because the pipe will explode if you get a lot of pressure. But not a great outcome. But so the pipes will actually push the water back into the soil and increase the soil moisture before it gets too dry. So basically, you're both draining and irrigating. You're using a very small amount of water, and you can actually capture your drainage because it's filtered through the soil. So it's mostly clean water. You can capture that and then use that to pump back in. So you're potentially not even using any freshwater resources for the irrigation side. And so that's just theoretically, that sounds like a great idea. As an engineer, I'm a very practical person. And so I'm not going to promote it as this is a great option until I test it out. So last year, ADS helped me install the tile drains in 3-acre plots. And I'm not sure we're going to get all of our treatments going this year because there's still some installation left. But I think we have enough to where we can compare drained and irrigated to drained only to irrigated only and to just rain fed, like no irrigation or drainage. And so I think we can compare those 4 options and just get a yield estimate this year. And then next year we'll, based on what we find out this year, we'll expand it to include all options.
It sounds almost too ideal. It really does.
It does, yeah. And so there's got to be, the cost is comparable to installing a subsurface drip irrigation. So it's not cheap. Mm-hmm. So there are downsides. But we also installed about 30 acres on a farmer's field in North Caddo Parish. Within weeks of the installation, he said the field had drained so much. And we had torrential rain in the spring. So we didn't even get anything installed until July. And he said the water coming off his field was immediate from the pipe once it was all connected. That particular soil and those particular fields in that area, even if we're in a drought, like the 2023 drought, if he took a tractor over it, a very heavy tractor, once he broke the plane of the soil surface, he said they would sink. Like it just stayed mucky. And so we're really looking forward to this crop season and get a report back of how the farming aspects have changed in terms of their management.
Yeah, again, it sounds super exciting, the possibilities of that. 100% an expensive investment, but if I could not dig ditches every year because the rainfall will knock down any raised beds, and then, you got ditches, and then you're irrigating. And so the possibility of that sounds really exciting. Was there previous examples of someone doing both, pumping in through this subsurface tile and removing it? Or was that something? Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that I think it happens more in the Midwest. So tile drainage is very popular in the Midwest. And I think they've been adding this irrigation aspect because just like us, they're experiencing a changing climate and they need to be able to add water some years. And so I don't think it's as big of a sector as just drainage, but it's definitely something that the company is very aware of and has been, installing. It's just not something we've had in Louisiana. And we're not the first state that they've worked with either. They have some trials in Mississippi and Arkansas as well. And those trials have been showing basically what I've been saying of they're basically, the company says that you can get into the field sooner after rainfall. You can plant earlier. There's all these benefits to it. And the farmers in Mississippi, especially, I've seen their data and I've heard them speak. They're just completely surprised at that actually happening. I have a lot of optimism that it's going to work for us. And I really hope that one specifically, I hope that actually catches and some people try it, because I think it's going to be amazingly different. But again, that's why we are testing it, to make sure that's actually true.
Yeah. And thinking even a little more broad picture, what kind of sustainable practices are you seeing in, coordination with these systems of irrigation in order to benefit twofold, that, you're getting every dollar's worth of water in your soil and in your crop?
I think the biggest thing is improving soil health. Historically, at least in Louisiana, drainage was the biggest issue. The irrigation side has been a newer issue. The drainage was the first issue. A lot of farmers went in and they cut their topsoil and land leveled their fields, but they didn't do anything to build the soil back up to be healthy. Even though they're adding irrigation capacity because, at least sometimes, because when they are irrigating, they can't hold anything in the soil. You need organic matter to hold water in the soil and be available for the plants. And so by cutting that topsoil, water's just basically running down the field and very little of it is infiltrating. Whereas when you improve the soil health, you get a lot more infiltration. It stores that water and then the plant can access it when it wants. So not only do you irrigate less, but you irrigate less often because that water's still there for the plant for longer. Cover cropping has been a huge deal with NRCS, and we've seen a lot of benefits to cover cropping in terms of building organic matter and also eliminating erosion of the soil that we are building there. And so cover cropping has been something I've tried to kind of pair into my work so that farmers understand that, again, the roots can only access the water in the soil. So if your soil can't store any water, your plants aren't going to get it, whether you're irrigating or not. And so that's just been a big push for me.
Yeah, my coworker has this amazing photo worth more than 1,000 words, probably like worth 1 million or 2 million words, where he's in California and lives near some almond groves. And he has these two farms right next to each other. One of them has ground cover in there, like they have these living plants in there. And the neighboring farmer has a lot of bare soil still under the almond trees. And of course, there's potentially other elements there, but, big rainstorm comes through and you can see the difference in flooding versus infiltration of that water from these two neighboring farms. And it's every time I see it, I'm like, oh, I just want this photo to be able to reach every farmer to help us just comprehend even infiltration and flooding, like the potential impact of plants in the soil instead of bare soil.
Yeah, we do say cover cropping is for building organic matter, and that is true. The other side of that is creating the structure, the soil structure, and maintaining that. So when you plant a cover crop, those roots go into the soil and it creates channels for water to move through and basically creates a structure for water to be stored. And so that's very important. A lot of times farmers in Louisiana are dealing with compaction, and it's very common. And when you have compaction, you can see it in every soil moisture sensor data with a compaction layer. That water does not move. It may move above it. It will move below it. Sometimes the roots can access below it, but you will not see water move in that one band. And it's because there's nowhere for it to go. It's basically trapped in that compaction layer. And so by adding a cover crop, you are creating those channels for water to move up and down. You don't have to worry about the water in the top 24 inches. Now your plants can access water that's coming up from 36, 45 inches. That water can move more freely and the plant is able to search for water. So those roots go deeper. You have typically a healthier crop. There's a lot more benefits than just the organic matter, but that's the first one that I want them to work on. And then you start seeing all these other benefits. It's compounding every year. So sometimes you don't see it in the first year. You see it maybe in the 5th year or the 10th year. It takes doing it over time for it to make a huge difference, but you will make a difference every year you do it.
Yeah, carbon continues to be a really incredible tool for soil.
Yeah.
And I still think we're learning in some ways something that was inherently happening with farmers a long time ago. To look at our carbon levels just as much as our nitrogen levels for our plants' health.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And then, are there any other methods that you're looking at to help recharge these groundwaters or manage surface waters to help maintain that balance?
Yeah, so one of my colleagues is looking at tailwater recovery, which is another aspect of kind of conserving your water system within your farm. Basically, if you're going to continue to furrow irrigate, you're going to create tailwater. Like, it's just the nature of that type of irrigation. Being able to capture that tailwater, store it on site, and then relift it means you're recycling all that nitrogen that just ran off the field with the water, and any other macro or micronutrients that may have gone with the water. And then you're lifting water from a much shallower depth than groundwater, which is cheaper. And then you're not pooling fresh water when you have this access to this surface water. Louisiana hasn't really taken on much tailwater recovery outside of maybe rice country because of their canal systems. That could be considered tailwater recovery. But like in the Mississippi Delta area, Mississippi and Arkansas have kind of gone that route. Louisiana hasn't yet, at least not in big numbers. But that's kind of another way that you can just kind of keep that water cycle happening on your farm internally. It's more efficient for everyone that way. Save a little money too.
Yeah, exactly. We're always looking for ways to help save a little more money.
Yeah.
As we're nearing towards the end here, I did want to just have a question about any cultural practices that are emerging in farms in Louisiana around irrigation.
Well, we kind of already talked about that homesteading side.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the biggest change culturally, is seeing more of a reliance on homegrown food and products. And so that has kind of changed who's calling me, for help. On the big ag side, I think that's yet to be seen. I think a lot of these changes that we've already talked about, the government changes and the programmatic changes, I think are really going to, how that plays out is really going to affect the culture around farming as well as irrigation. So I'm very interested to see what happens with that. I think we're going to see less reliance on irrigation for beautification and more reliance on irrigation for food production and things that, help us live.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I am curious as well. So even with us growing an understanding of that crucialness of water and water rights and, droughts and floods that we're experiencing, as well with that, what do you wish farmers understood better from your point of view as that irrigation engineer?
I wish they understood where their water comes from and where it goes. Like, there's a lot of focus on the farm. There's not a lot of focus of the entire water cycle, where that water is originating and where it's going. I think if farmers had a better idea of how their soil handled water and where it was stored, how transitioning it from the ground into rivers and streams and bayous is not necessarily natural, just kind of having a better idea of how water moves and where it goes, I think would really help the conversations that I'm having. Because a lot of times they're very focused on just making that crop. That is the only thing of concern. And I fully understand that. But when I come in to talk to them about irrigating, I have to know where that water is coming from and where it's going. That's part of the conversation. And I think sometimes we get off on that. Like, we're not lining up.
Yeah.
So I think that would be my biggest thing.
Yeah. And that just opens so many doors as well of resource management as a whole, that as sustainable farmers, we're looking to tend to not just our little circle, although we really need that circle to be tended to, and we need farmers tending to it. But, we have this responsibility, because you never pull on one string in a spider web, right?
Yeah.
You're pulling on the entire water system as farmers.
It's all connected, right? Like, what you do does affect your neighbor. Mm-hmm. As we've heard, there are farmers who have gotten more efficient with their irrigation, and they have actually harmed their neighbor because their neighbor was using their ditch water for their irrigation. And now there's not enough. So, I mean, it is all connected in some way. Yeah.
Oh, that is the most hilarious
Yeah,
and intentional effect of sustainable agriculture.
exactly. Exactly.
Um, Thank you so much for all your insights, all your amazing knowledge, and everything you do for farmers to help, help our water system, help us be more efficient with our crops. And thank you so much for sharing this water system in Louisiana and in, all of our world. So I appreciate you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. This has been a pleasure.
Yeah, I appreciate you.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Additional information about this episode and related resources can be found at atra.ncat.org. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Voices from the Field wherever you get your podcasts. ATRA, Voices from the Field, is produced by the National Center for Appropriate Technology, headquartered in Butte, Montana. It's supported by the USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service as part of NCAT's ATRA Sustainable Agriculture Program. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA or NCAT. We'll catch you again next week, and until then, keep on farming.